Last year, KUOW launched a new experiment. We called it Curiosity Club. At the heart of this experiment was one question: can great food and surprising stories transform a group of strangers into a community? Here's how the club works. 10 diverse community members are brought together for a dinner party or series of dinners. Before each engagement, members are assigned multimedia KUOW stories as homework. These stories serve as the fuel for our conversation. Afterwards, participants reflect on our conversation and try to gauge whether or not we were able to thaw that infamous Seattle freeze. It's like a bookless book club or a nerdy supper club. And on February 28th, 2019, 10 Curiosity Club members from very different walks of life were brought together for our first pop-up dinner at the Cloud Room on Capitol Hill. Two of the participants, Ishea Brown and Santiago, didn't exactly hit it off. Risking the possibility of an awkward conversation, we brought them into the studio a few weeks later to talk about it.
One of the biggest takeaways that I had at the event was a question that you asked, and the way that I remember you asking it was asking the group if we all thought we lived in a post-racial society. And I remember having this guttural reaction to being one, why is someone even asking this in 2019? I had an emotional reaction to it, and I remember turning around and kind of laughing, is this being asked seriously, or is it more provocative to probe?
The way that I remember asking the question was, do you think that we will ever have the capacity to live in a post-racial society?
I was at the dinner. I remember Joe asking the group this question, as Ishea remembered it. Does anybody think we're living in a post-racial society, as in presently? I checked in with my fellow dinner party guests, and the group was split. Some remembered the question framed as Joe remembers, as a hypothetical wondering about the future, but most recalled it as a question about right now. Disagreement about the actual question aside, one thing was undeniable: the beat of radio silence that followed its asking.
I remember thinking, why would anyone ask this question knowing the current climate? It felt to me, an unproductive question, because it's just asking if it's wet outside when it's raining.
In her follow-up blog post about our Curiosity Club dinner, Ishea opens by stating that she was shocked by Joe's question, not just for the question itself as she remembers it, but because it was a fellow person of color who asked it. Ishea is African American. She grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, where she was the only Black girl in her grade until she was in high school. Joe grew up in the suburbs of Seattle. He is a second-generation Filipino American.
Here's an opportunity for me to ask the question again.
Yeah.
Do you think that we will ever live in a post-racial society?
I would hope that we do take strides towards living in a society where people can actually show up as their whole authentic selves every day and be accepted and loved, regardless of their background, their race, their gender, their class, their education, all of those things. I would love for those things to happen. Do I think that they will realistically happen in our lifetime? Who even knows? I mean, I come from a family where my mother picked cotton on a plantation in Mississippi, so my existence is beyond what she may have thought could have happened. And even for my grandparents to see a President Barack Obama is beyond what they could have dreamed for seeing in their lifetime. So who is to say what could happen?
Joe was nimble at turning the conversation back to Ishea, asking her about her life, her beliefs, her experience of our Curiosity Club dinner. And although he never explicitly argued for a post-racial society, Joe did continue to return to the idea that if there were no races, there would be no racism. Ishea pushed back, and in response, Joe finally opened up.
I think the idea of having to give up your culture, or even someone thinking that they would need to rid themselves of things that are so beautiful for something else, it's crazy to me. And I think that it also puts the responsibility of eradicating racism on the people that are not in charge of racism.
It's interesting that you bring up the idea of giving up your culture. I think that, yeah, you're totally right. As a person of color, racism is a huge thing. I mean, I'm always, looking at oh, wow, it seems like the white people have it going on, right? I wish I was that guy. I wish I was
But see,
normal.
I don't think that that's how you I mean, I think it's
Yeah, no,
not a
I'm
good
not saying
feeling
that.
to have.
I'm not saying that that's something that I had chosen for myself. That's just how I processed it growing up. Because again, I'm coming from the West Coast where it's given that racism is a bad thing, and yet at the same time, you're confronted with all the messaging in the media that tell you like, no, white is the right way to go. Like, white is the thing you should be striving for. Like, these are the people that they're putting in front of you to idolize and worship. And so, of course, growing past that and learning more about things, that's something that I want to get rid of. But even as a child, those are the forces that were working on me.
In addition to the outside messaging that Joe was absorbing about whiteness being not just ideal, but normal, Joe also grew up hearing similar messages at home.
My mother in particular, I remember her telling us things about how my grandmother would act, and she would say, don't eat with your hands. Just because your grandma eats it with her hands doesn't mean that you should. That's really kind of gross, right? Same thing about speaking other languages. That's something that started with my grandparents, right? They came over speaking Tagalog. When they got to America, they realized teaching our kids that might make them seem like a lower class.
So was there a lot of pressure to assimilate?
Yeah, and so I think that becoming more aware of just even that basic family history has sort of helped me understand why I feel the way I do about certain things.
Here's the thing about Curiosity Club. The hope at the core of this experiment is community, not alignment. Joe and Ishea never came to an agreement about what the question was that Joe originally asked, or whether or not it's possible or even a good thing to imagine a future where race in America is irrelevant. But they did keep talking. Even as we ran out of time and unplugged the mics, and as they posed for a photo before they left, they were laughing and pretend boxing before finally flashing 2 big peace signs to the camera. Since this conversation, Ishea and Joe have continued to stay in touch.
Ishea, now that you've been a part of the Curiosity Club, you've had the opportunity to write for KUOW, and we've been able to have this conversation in our follow-up. Would you continue this conversation? Would you continue to be a part of the Curiosity Club?
Yeah, I definitely would. And it makes me want to reach out to other people in the club and get to have more one-on-one time, because I think that that's really, for me, the more enriching experience is the follow-up to everything.
I agree.
You can see photos of Ishea and Joe and read Ishea's reflection on our dinner and learn all about our nerdy supper club experiment at kuow.org/Curiosity Club. For KUOW Public Radio in Seattle, I'm Kristin Leong.